Hi, my name is Blake Jones, and this is my leadership interview presentation. I'm sorry about the shoddy lighting, but this is the only way that I could record on the road without bothering the other people in my small hotel room. I'm going to be interviewing my raid leader. His name is Michael. So, raiding in World of Warcraft, which is the game that we raid in, is sort of a situation in which 20 people get together and they go into this sort of dungeon scenario and work together to kill. It's generally between 10 to 12 bosses, and you slowly work your way through these raid scenarios. In the form of raiding that we do, Mythic raiding, the hardest tier, the progression of these bosses can be very slow, very tedious and arduous, taking up to 100 times of what we call wiping, where you are failing, getting everybody healed back up, big restart time, maybe up to 5 minutes, and you're trying again. And you're just sort of hitting your head against that wall for a long period of time until you eventually make your way through what is referred to as these raids. And generally, you're going to have a raid leader when it comes to these scenarios, and that's what Michael is to me. I thought that he was a great interview candidate because of, like I said, the tedious nature of what you're going through. Mini raid teams like ours will be looking at 2 times to 3 times a week, a 4-hour a night raiding scenario. And so that's a lot of time for anybody to be doing anything, especially something that's as mentally tasking and takes as much focus as this takes. So I think that it was just sort of a unique scenario, probably not an interview topic that a lot of people would use, but definitely a unique situation that calls for a very, very strong leader that a lot of people wouldn't normally think of. You think of it, business examples and things like that. So I just thought it would be kind of interesting to talk to him. I would have liked to get him on the phone, but he's unfortunately currently in the hospital right now, so we just corresponded over text, and these are some questions that I asked him. I started off, I asked him what he felt was most important when it comes to being a good leader in general, especially under stressful and tedious circumstances. He said, "I think that always trying to keep a level head, but also dance on that knife's edge of real stern harshness at the same time. I think in certain scenarios, like say when I'm working with the nonprofit in my day-to-day, him and his wife run a nonprofit for their day jobs, the management style is very hands-off and type A. But in a setting like raiding where complacency of one really brings down the whole team in a very felt way, I think it's pretty fundamental that you're able to talk to somebody and take them to task without hurting their feelings when their carelessness or laziness is bringing everyone else down and wasting their time. But I think it could be anything else, when people could really be doing anything else with their discretionary time. Watching sports, spending time with their significant others, but because we all like to do this together, I have to do my best to make this valuable time worth it for everybody to spend here with us." I went on, I asked him, I also want to know if he's ever considered taking a step back, or if he really genuinely enjoys the position given all the responsibility that comes along with it. He said that, "I think that while I really do enjoy the position to a certain extent, and the fact that I'm able to guide the team in a way that seems most practical to me, with little to no oversight, is obviously appealing, but I can't always trust that I'll always have the best judgment. And given that case, that somebody else in the guild shows themselves really capable, and I felt I could really step back without seeing a detriment to our rate of progression, I'd be glad to take a step back and, step into a more passive role. I'm sure my fiance wouldn't mind that either. It can be time consuming, but when you really like the group of people that you raid with, it can also be eternally fulfilling to help that group find success together." I was really curious what he thought about if he'd seen people in the past that might be up to this task, like that would put him in that position where he would be willing to step down. And he said that there was somebody along a few years ago that people referred to as coach, and he was really vocal. He definitely saw him taking the helm once he was engaged, but he had some family complications and had to step back. But since then, he hasn't really encountered anybody that thought could take on the role without seeing some sort of detriment to how the rate at which we were progressing. I asked him, "I also want to know how you found yourself in a leadership position. I know he hasn't always had that role in guilds. He's been in part of the past." He said, "Well, I've been in a lot of really established world top guilds in my several years of raiding. It wasn't until I had my buddy Mike asked to come raiding with me that I came up with the idea to take my experience and form a little clan of our own to see what we could eke out together." I asked him, "How do you motivate and recalibrate someone onto the team's objective when they're repeatedly making mistakes and losing focus with every mistake, or sort of tilting, if you were talking poker terms? And I really liked his response. He said, I think the sensitivity of his response in this one, I guess. I think it's really important to know the person. There's certain people in our guild that have more of a tendency to get tilted than others, and you have to be sensitive to when you see the wheels falling off of them and know the correct approach to sort of soothe that situation and get them back on track. Some respond better to higher levels of stern talking to than others, so knowing your audience is really important here. But at the end of the day, it's all about positive intent. You're not trying to tear anybody down or demean them. You're really just trying to refocus on the objective for the betterment of everybody. And even if somebody is, in that place where they're in their feelings, you can always realign under that once you get out of that dark place and, sort of use that motivation to get you back on track. I asked him, what are the most important things that you look for when it comes to choosing a potential officer, which, when it comes to rating, would be sort of a second command person in the guild, somebody who takes up secondary responsibilities, maybe does certain side strategizing when it comes to small groups of the team, to sort of take some of the pressure off of the shoulder of the raid leader himself. And he said, I'd say that first and foremost, somebody who isn't afraid to be vocal and just speak up and not be hesitant with their words. Other than that, it's really just game knowledge and a level head, and it's not as hard as people make it out to be. But really, confidence is so important in this position, and you always have to find somebody that isn't going to hesitate in those dire moments, because hesitation oftentimes means doom, and there's nothing you can do about that. So yeah, definitely somebody who is forthright with their words and not afraid to speak up. I asked him if there's an example of a time that he didn't feel cut out for the role. And he said, he was pretty vulnerable. He said that he thought during the last expansion, during our progression on Ashara, which I was there for, and this was a really hard time, he said, I really found myself at odds with myself when we were just hitting a wall for weeks on end, and I really lacked the words at a certain point for what the best path forward was for us. There's only so many comforting things that you can say. At a point, it starts to feel pretty tedious, and you start to wonder if people even believe your words of comfort at a certain point. It gets into a really dark place. I was wondering if he was always sort of a leader in maybe his friend groups, in his school. Did you always find yourself in leadership positions when you were growing up? And he said yes and no. I was never afraid to take charge in, say, a school environment, like you say, but I wouldn't be the first person to say that I'm an extrovert or a leader or anything like that. I think I just do a good job of fitting in where I see need. And I think that's was just a really good point. In terms of general leaders, we talked about this a lot during the course about how oftentimes leaders are just products of their situation and not necessarily somebody who has that desire to be like a leader of an organization or even a raid team or anything like that. I said, what was, from your perspective, are the worst traits that a leader can have? He said, I think, like we talked about before, just someone who's easily prone to that tilting negative intent when they're really willing to tear somebody down who's already in a stressed and bad place on the account of them repeatedly effing up, feeling everybody's eyes on them, and then you jump down their throat with ad hominem attacks. I've definitely seen many a raid leader like this in my day, and I never really wanted to be that guy. What's the point at which you're willing to give up on somebody as a leader? When they show that they put their own personal interests before those of the team. I thought he just simply put it that. And I thought that was really strong. How do you keep morale high when things feel hopeless? And he said, I think number one is leading by example. I'm never going to let my performance falter when things look bleak if there's anything I can do about it. And I think that always 100% mentality can really be a boon when you're trying to keep everyone motivated in a rut for hours and hours on end. And I closed with, if you could give me one important word when it comes to leadership, what would that be? And he responded with empathy.